During VCT Americas Stage 1, 100 Thieves ended up being an okay team. Good enough to make it to playoffs, third in their group, and they did end up taking the best team in the region, G2, all the way to map 3 overtime. However, they got knocked out by G2, and they did not qualify for VCT Masters Toronto. So before we get to Toronto, as we look at some of these teams that are missing out on that tournament, where are 100 Thieves going to go for Stage 2 and beyond? Will they be able to put enough wins together to be able to make it to Champions 2025 in Paris? Or is this roster that is for the most part been together for 2 years now just kind of running out of steam? So this is the board we have today. We will be looking at all the stats that this team had during Stage 1, starting with their overall record and how the games went. The overall record for the group stage of Stage 1 was 3-2. They started their group stage against Sentinels, a team that they usually lose against. They were able to beat Sentinels during the playoff bracket of Stage 2 last year, but besides that, it's been mostly losses against that team. And that history would repeat. 100 Thieves would get a map win on Haven 13-9, but they would go out in a pretty embarrassing 13-1 loss on Split. But overall, that's a matchup they usually lose, so whatever. You go on to the next matchup, hoping for a bounce back, and that's exactly what 100 Thieves did. They moved on to face Evil Geniuses, where they won a pretty convincing 2-0 victory, winning Fracture 13-10 and Haven 13-7. And this is where they went on a bit of a win streak. They went on to face off against Loud after that one, a team that desperately needed a win, and Loud did make it pretty hard for 100 Thieves to win that one, dominating 100 Thieves on Haven 13-6, and then 100 Thieves needed to get a comeback win on Icebox to be able to take that map, and then Split was a bit better for them, a map that has been kind of up and down for them depending on the day, but with their cryo cells on Sage Comp, they were able to get this one done. Then after that, they went on to face 2G, and while it would be a pretty close first map that did end up going into overtime, they would win Ascent 15-13, so they avoid the upset loss there. Then heading into the last week of the group stage, they were facing off against Crew, a team that was fighting for top spot in their group, and 100 Thieves already kind of lost out on the chance to make it to the top spot. Sentinels already had the head-to-head against them, and they were very likely going to have a better record than them. So it didn't really matter too much for 100 Thieves to win this one, but they wouldn't do it anyway, losing that one 2-0, two pretty close maps, 13-10 on Fracture and then 13-9 on Icebox. Not the most impactful loss, but it's still nice to get those champs points, but overall they are still in playoffs. So 100 Thieves end up locking up that third place spot in Group Alpha. Not the best record in their group. They ended up having maps be 7-5 in their favor, winning 2 more maps than they lost during that group stage, and they had a RAM differential of -5. And to start that playoff bracket, they had a pretty rough matchup going up against MIBR, a team that they did previously beat at kickoff, but that was a long time ago at that point, and MIBR had gotten a lot better, especially with bringing in their new addition in Verno after he was kicked off Energy, and MIBR were seeking revenge for that loss at kickoff, and they would deliver it. 100 Thieves would lose Split 10-13 and then lose Icebox 4-13, so getting pretty dominated on that second map. Being knocked down to the lower bracket, 100 Thieves would go up against Energy, a team that they were also looking for revenge against. Energy knocked 100 Thieves out of kickoff, and Energy had been struggling mightily during Stage 1, so 100 Thieves were looking to prove that they were the better team, and they ended up doing that pretty convincingly. A 2-0 victory for them. They won Fracture 13-5, and then they won Haven 13-11. So they started their playoff bracket with a bit of a dud against MIBR, but then they have a pretty good bounce back game against Energy. However, then they had to go up against G2, a team that basically nobody picked them to win against. G2 were the best team in the Americas for the entire year and arguably the best team in the entire world. G2 had just come off of their loss against Sentinels, their very first in-region loss this year. So G2 were hoping for that bounce back, but 100 Thieves would not make it easy for them. While 100 Thieves would get dominated on Haven 13-4, they would bounce back and win Split in overtime. Then map 3 on Pearl, a map that 100 Thieves had been struggling on throughout the year, and G2 had typically been very good at this year. So with the odds stat against them, 100 Thieves actually performed very well. It would be tied at 6 at the half, but then 100 Thieves were able to win 5 rounds in a row to have an 11-6 lead. They were 2 rounds away from putting the Bangkok Grand Finalists out of Toronto contention. However, 100 Thieves would run into some pretty unfortunate luck, like EU not being able to see the indicator for Visa's ultimate due to a glitch in the game, and because of VCT's rule set, reset, they weren't allowed to replay that round. So stuff like that, as well as G2 remembering how good they were, meant that 100 Thieves could not win the game in regulation. Then we would go on to overtime, and after a very back and forth overtime where both teams are only winning on attack, G2 would end the game at round 30 and 100 Thieves were knocked out of the tournament. So they ended up placing 5th to 6th at playoffs, and they lost to two of the teams that are heading to Toronto, G2 and MIBR. Two very good teams, and they were able to bring the better of the two to the brink of elimination. So you would think that stuff like that would mean that this team is on the right path. They weren't able to make it to the second international of the year, nor were they the first. Missing out on both Bangkok and Toronto, definitely not what this organization wanted. However, doing that good against the best team in the entire region, that is a very impressive feat. And if a couple other things go their way during that match, if that Vi's ultimate glitch doesn't happen, do they win it? Maybe, but unfortunately for 100 Thieves, that is not the reality that we live in. So is that a sign of good things to come for this roster, or was that a bit of a fluke strong performance while G2 were kind of in a slump? Well, let's look at some stats and see if we can come to any conclusion. First, we will be talking about some map stats, looking at a map that they're good on and a map that they're pretty bad on. Starting with the good Fracture, they have a 2-1 record on it, so they've only played it 3 times, but they've been effective on it so far, having an attack win percentage of 57% and a defense win percentage of 56. Pretty solid map overall. They're above 55% in both attack and defense, so that is a sign that they're quite solid on it. However, then we look at Pearl, and it's a bit of a disaster for them. While they did do quite well against G2 on it, they still overall have pretty bad numbers here. They have a 0-4 record on it. They have not won on that map this year, and I'm not including any stats from the EWC qualifiers. This is just VCT. They have an attack win percentage of 44% and a defense win percentage of 37. So both halves kind of a disaster for them, but especially that defense win percentage. 37% is simply not good enough for that side. I know the meta has been pretty attack-sided for the last little bit, but still you have to be better than 37. Looking at overall attack and defense stats, we can see that trend kind of stay for 100 Thieves, where they're better on attack than they are defense. On attack, they're pretty good overall. In 275 rounds, they have a 52% win percentage, which is 144 round wins to 131 lost. Versus defense, where in 303 rounds, they have a 46% win percentage, 141 won to 162 lost. So they're pretty decent overall on attack, both on a map that they're quite good on Fracture, and just overall. However, their defense is definitely something that needs to be cleaned up. You cannot win in the VCT if you cannot defend some of the other teams' very solid attacks. There are some very aggressive teams in the region, and there's a lot of players throughout not just the Americas, but the entire world that can absolutely have their way with your defense if it's not up to par. But how about the players on this roster? This roster is mostly same as how it was last year. The only substitution that they ended up making was putting in Xander in place of Bang, who went on to go to Sentinels. And I'll get to Xander in a bit, but for Bang, that definitely seemed to be the right choice for him. He's been quite good on that roster, being one of their strongest players throughout the year and been pretty consistent. And the team has made both internationals so far this year, whereas 100 Thieves have struggled to find their footing within their own region. So even though this roster is mostly the same, and last year's roster ended up making it to Shanghai, they would fall before they could make it to champs, but they did make it to an international and did pretty well at it. But maybe that run ends up being a bit of a flash in the pan for this roster, because I don't really see them doing that again. And just by looking at the stats, we can see that there might be a bit of a carry job going on here, because Cryocells has undoubtedly been their best player, and no other player on the roster has really even come close to his same performance. Not that you need every player on your team to be as good as your best player, but there's definitely a drop-off when you look at Cryocells versus the rest of the team. Looking at Cryocells' stats, he has the second best rating in the entire Americas at 1.23, tied with Luxio. A kills per round of 0.89, which is top 3 as well, so nearly averaging a kill per round. Overall KDA is 363 kills, 277 deaths, 94 assists for a KD ratio of 1.31. He played 5 matches in group stage and then 3 matches in playoffs, and he still maintained a KD ratio of 1.31. That is an insane number. Most players do not hit that, especially the more you play. Looking at agents he played, he ended up being kind of a Sentinel duelist flex, which he's been for about a year on this roster. He would also dabble in some other roles with 100 Thieves, but we'll get to their roles in a minute. But during stage 1, he played Yoru, ISO, Sage, Jett, as well as Chamber. Cryocells is a very effective player, not really looking at a place on any of the agents that he played. Yoru is really good in the meta right now, probably the best duelist in the entire game, so having a player that can be effective on him is very important. And Cryocells definitely seems to be comfortable on that agent as well as elite on Jett, and he used to play Chamber in 2022 and he has maintained some pretty good skill on that agent. And his Sage with that split comp, it's bared fruit sometimes, but overall I wouldn't put any loss they've had on that map on Cryo. Overall, Cryo is an incredible player, one of the best players in the entire region, but how are the rest of the players doing? I ordered all these players by ranking in stage 1, so the second best rating was EU. He had an overall rating of 1.08, 8 kills per round of 0.67. He had 273 kills, 264 deaths, 110 assists for a KD ratio of 1.03. He was their info initiator during the stage. He played Taeho, Sova, as well as Fade. EU last year was probably a top 2 player on this roster, and he has maintained that form. He's overall pretty consistent. He won't wow you with his play or anything, but he is good enough to hang. And overall, I think he's a pretty solid player. Is his Taeho the best? Maybe not, especially when you compare it to some of the other top Taehos in the region. But Taeho is getting nerfed, and I can see that benefiting a team like 100 Thieves and a player like EU. Don't really have a lot of bad things to say about EU, but I also think if he's your second best player, then there might be a deeper issue with depth in this team. Because after that, we move on to Xander, who did have a pretty rough start to the year, but has improved steadily. In stage 1, he had a rating of exactly 1, 8 kills per round of 0.64. He had 262 kills, 283 deaths, 179 assists for a KD ratio of 0.93. And he was their resident smokes player. He played Omen, Brimstone, Astra, as well as Viper. Overall, Xander has been okay, but he has definitely not shown the same level of ability that Bang did on this roster in previous years, and in terms of what he's doing on Sentinels right now as well. During the offseason, I was saying that that move was more of a lateral move. I kind of saw Xander on kind of the same level as Bang, but I think now it's pretty clear Bang is the better player. So while that's no fault to Xander, they are different players, and you really shouldn't compare them aside from them just being smokes players and being on the same team just at different times. It is something that is going to be brought up, especially when Sentinels are doing much better with Bang and 100 Thieves continue to struggle. Xander is a perfectly fine smokes player to have in most situations, but 100 Thieves definitely seems to miss their old smokes player because he was both very good at the smokes part of it and very good in the clutch. So that area has kind of been lacking for this roster. It really shouldn't be on Xander to make up that difference, but that skill loss from Bang isn't really being made up for from anybody else on the roster. Which brings me to Asuna, a player who has been on this organization and on this team for quite some time. Asuna is one of the longest tenured players in the entire VCT. Being on 100 Thieves since 2020, he's been through every single version of this roster. Teams being built around him specifically. He was seen as one of the best young talents of this game, and he still is technically the youngest player on this entire team, which is absolutely hilarious because it feels like he's been around forever, because he has. He's just been really young and still is. And while Asuna in the early days was seen as this really solid young talent that 100 Thieves did a great job at picking up, it hasn't really bared fruit for the organization in quite some time. And this is a narrative that's been around Asuna for a while. This is something that I've talked about in previous 100 Thieves videos. Asuna has moments where he gets these crazy kills, like getting a kill while jumping off of a rope or something like that. He'll do crazy stuff every once in a while that'll make you say, wow, this guy is amazing, but then his overall play and his overall consistency, it's just not where you want it to be. During stage 1, he had an overall rating of 0.92, second worst on the team. He had a kills per round of 0.68, which is second on the team, but not by very much. He's 1 percentage below EU. He had 278 kills, 318 deaths, 119 assists for a KD ratio of 0.87. And during stage 1, he was playing a duelist initiator flex role. He played Neon, Raze, Gecko, and he only played Taeho once, but he did play him. I definitely think that Asuna has a lot of skill, especially when it comes to this game. He's been around for a while, and he's been on this tier 1 team for a reason. He's a solid player, he's a good presence, he seems like a perfectly nice guy, but overall I just don't know if this 100 Thieves team needs to be built around him anymore. There are other really good young talents in the Americas, and I feel like with Asuna, he doesn't really have much of a defined role. You have Cryocells playing a duelist Sentinel flex role, but I don't necessarily think you need to put Cryo on Sentinel at all. Aside from maybe Chamber sometimes, I think if Cryocells was your main duelist, I think you would be in pretty good shape. But Cryo doesn't typically play Raze or Neon, so they put that on Asuna. And sometimes he can be really good at those two characters and sometimes not. So it kind of just leaves 100 Thieves in this weird state of flux with their duelist position, because they have two players that can play that role to an effective level, but depending on the agent. Maybe Cryocells can play Raze, maybe his Raze would be a lot better, and when they play Raze maps, maybe he can try it out, but that typically just hasn't been the way that they go. So I feel like just having both these players on this roster, I don't think the overall skill that you're getting from both of them combined is necessarily worth it, having this weird flux duelist position. I think it really shoots them in the foot when it comes to compositions. So definitely think that they should have a bit more of a defined set duelist player, and if you're choosing between Cryo and Asuna, you're probably choosing Cryo. Moving on to the final player we have to talk about, we have Boostio, a player that definitely gets a lot of attention. That is, of course, because of his very out there personality, the quotes that he has, the way he acts on social media, but also because of his history in the game as an IGL, and he is this team's IGL. Boostio, when he was on Evil Geniuses, was seen as one of, if not the best IGL in the entire world. He did lead them to a champs win. He helped turn around that team with the help of Potter and bringing in Demon 1. He was instrumental in that team's success, while having a pretty solid individual performance himself. However, he then moves on from Evil Geniuses, goes to 100 Thieves, and he's basically the leader of that entire team. He also brings along a coach. Zeeks was previously an assistant coach with Evil Geniuses. So by all accounts, Zeeks and Boostio are the leaders of this team, and Boostio's individual performance just has not been good for a while now. IGLs don't need to be the ones that are consistently putting up high fraggy numbers or having this great individual performance, but there is a line where you become more of a liability and your calling doesn't make up for it. That was very much the situation with FNS, who had better numbers than Boostio. Boostio's overall numbers were pretty abysmal during Stage 1. He had a rating of 0.75, which is bottom 5 in the entire region. He had a kills per round of 0.52. He had 211 kills, 309 deaths, 111 assists for a KD ratio of 0.68. He was mainly playing Sentinel, but played a bit of Initiator. He was playing Cypher, Killjoy, Breach, as well as Vise. When Boostio's calling is working, the teams that he leads can be very effective. We have seen it before. We are in an era of Valorant where, yes, many of the IGLs would probably have better stats if they weren't the ones calling, but many of them, especially the teams that are the top teams that are winning tournaments, have IGLs that are doing very well individually. So when it comes to 100 Thieves, I don't blame Boostio for all this team's problems, but is his calling worth it to keep a player with these admittedly not very good stats? Based off of this team's recent performance, I would say no. I'm not saying I think 100 Thieves should kick him or anything, but at some point, if this continues, you have to look at other options. Especially with the case of this team's roles are just kind of all over the place. You do have a set Info Initiator player in EU and a set Smokes player in Xander, but aside from that, everyone is a flex player. You have a duelist playing Sentinel, you have a duelist playing Initiator, you have a Sentinel player playing Initiator, which that's an easy jump. So while I think on this roster there is a lot of talent, I don't know if this mixture of players is what is necessarily going to bring this team to success. We'll see how they do in Stage 1 and at the EWC qualifiers, but overall, I just don't know if I see this team going too far, and my concerns from the offseason seem to be rearing their ugly head. Anyways, that's all I have to talk about today. Let me know in the comment section down below, what do you think of this team? How do you think they're going to do during Stage 2? Let me know all that and more in the comment section down below. Please click like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!